At exactly 1:47 in the morning, the electronic eyes of a quiet suburban home went completely dark. The voice on the radio crackled with a frantic warning about a victim with severe cardiovascular issues and a pacemaker. The only possible way to truly understand what actually happened in the dark was to forensically dissect the very smart technology that was heavily supposed to keep her safe. They had to turn their complete investigative attention to the unforgiving cloud data. When digital forensic experts finally cracked open the encrypted logs of the smart home network, they did not find answers. They found a gaping, terrifying black hole that defied all conventional criminal logic. The data stream revealed a precise timeline of the intrusion, but the timestamps created a narrative so disturbing it paralyzed the entire investigation. According to the meticulously recorded server logs, the external Ring security camera network was deliberately and entirely disabled at exactly 1:47 in the morning. This was not a random power surge or a temporary glitch in the neighborhood grid. It was a highly sophisticated, targeted attack on the primary visual defense system of the property. Someone with deep technical knowledge knew exactly how to sever the connection without triggering an immediate catastrophic alarm. The dispatcher made it chillingly clear that without daily medication, her life would be in immediate critical danger within 24 hours. At 1:47, the house went completely visually dark. The perimeter was breached and the electronic eyes were formally shut down. In a normal home invasion, this exact minute would mark the beginning of a chaotic and rapid smash and grab operation. An intruder would kick in a door, grab whatever was valuable, and flee into the night before law enforcement could respond. But the data logs from inside the dark house told a completely different and profoundly chilling story. Remember that Nancy was deeply dependent on a highly sensitive electronic pacemaker that constantly communicated with her personal smartphone. That phone was sitting undisturbed on the kitchen counter inside the house. The pacemaker application continuously logged the biological rhythm of her beating heart over a short-range Bluetooth connection. That connection requires extreme physical proximity to function properly. If Nancy had been forcibly dragged out of the house and thrown into a waiting, the situation instantly transformed into a desperate race against the clock. Vehicle at 1:47, that vital Bluetooth tether would have snapped instantly. The medical data stream would have terminated the very second she crossed the threshold of the property line, but it did not snap. The digital records proved beyond any shadow of a doubt that the medical application continued to receive strong, uninterrupted data from the pacemaker long after the cameras died. The heart monitor pulsed steadily at 150. It maintained a solid connection at 2 o'clock. The data stream remained perfectly stable at 2:15. The terrifying reality hidden in the code was that Nancy was still inside the house. It was not until exactly 2:28 in the morning, a full 41 minutes, after the perimeter security was blinded, that the biological signal finally vanished. But the digital numbers simply do not add up. The Bluetooth connection was severed permanently. The implications of this 41-minute gap are absolutely horrifying. The attackers did not breach the property and immediately flee with their victim. They intentionally stayed inside the dark, quiet house with an 84-year-old woman for nearly 3/4 of an hour. What in the world were they doing during that massive stretch of time? They were not ransacking the bedrooms because nothing was reported stolen. They were not panicking because the timeline shows extreme methodical patience. They were deliberately holding a medically fragile hostage inside her own living room while her phone sat just feet away, silently, recording her terrified heartbeat. This was not a botched robbery. This was a sustained period of absolute control and calculated terror. It completely breaks the established mold of how violent intruders typically operate under pressure. Why would a team of highly organized criminals risk remaining at an active crime scene for 41? If an intruder breached the house at 1:47, why did the victim's heart excruciating minutes when every passing second exponentially increased their chances of being caught? Were they interrogating her? Were they meticulously cleaning up the physical forensic evidence before they departed? Or were they simply waiting for a specific extraction signal from the outside? The digital silence at 2:28 marks the exact moment she was finally taken from the home. But the preceding 41 minutes remain a pitch black nightmare of unanswered questions. The timeline anomaly elevates this from a tragedy to a highly complex thriller. If you want to know what the police discovered when they dug even deeper into the digital abyss, hit that subscribe button right now, because the evidence is about to take an even darker turn. The sheer terrifying gravity of the medical situation immediately transformed the entire nature of the police response from a standard missing person inquiry into an unprecedented logistical nightmare. Monitor remain within close range of her phone for almost 3/4 of an hour. The terrifying reality of the situation was laid completely bare when internal emergency dispatch audio was unexpectedly leaked to the national media. The shocking recordings broadcast widely across Fox News and The Independent exposed the raw, unfiltered desperation of the authorities during those critical early morning hours. The tense audio files clearly capture a harried emergency coordinator urgently addressing all available patrol units with a highly specific mandate. The frantic dispatcher stated with absolute chilling clarity that the fragile victim suffered from severe high blood pressure, a dangerous heart condition, and relied entirely on a delicate internal pacemaker. But the absolutely most chilling part of the leaked radio transmission was the rigid, unforgiving medical deadline. The tense voice on the radio explicitly warned the officers that if the elderly victim did not receive her vital, daily prescribed medication within a strict 24-hour window, the biological consequences would be fatal. This leaked, terrifying detail completely altered the psychological landscape of the investigation. The police were definitively no longer just casually looking for a stolen vehicle or a missing citizen. What exactly was unfolding in the dark while that fragile digital tether held on? They were now actively engaged in a literal, breathless, desperate race against time. Every single passing tick of the clock pushed the fragile 84-year-old woman closer to massive, catastrophic biological failure. The intense, crushing pressure forced the detectives to move with aggressive speed to thoroughly clear the immediate inner circle of family members. Suspicion always naturally falls on the very last person to see a victim alive. So investigators immediately turned their full focused attention to the son-in-law. Tommaso Cioni had peacefully driven her home and closely watched the heavy garage door safely close at 9:50 the previous night. law enforcement heavily scrutinized his entire timeline, his digital footprint, and his exact physical movements. However, after a rapid but incredibly exhaustive background check, CBS News formally confirmed that the authorities officially cleared him of any lingering suspicion. He was definitively ruled out as a potential suspect, allowing the police to desperately, frantically refocus their rapidly dwindling resources on external unknown violent threats. With the immediate family firmly cleared, and the medical clock ticking mercilessly away, the investigators began frantically scouring the vast, sprawling network of municipal traffic cameras and public emergency call logs for any faint sign of a violent struggle. Criminals who break into homes usually grab what they can and flee within minutes. That is exactly when a deeply, profoundly disturbing piece of potential forensic evidence suddenly surfaced from an entirely unexpected, unofficial channel. According to an independent investigative report published on YouTube by a creator named Jim Murray, there was a massive, alarming, unverified development in the early dark morning hours. A frantic 911 emergency call was reportedly hastily placed during the pitch black hours just before dawn by an incredibly terrified passing motorist. The anonymous caller reportedly witnessed a deeply horrifying violent scene actively playing out on a dark, isolated stretch of asphalt. They reportedly told the emergency operator that they clearly saw a highly distressed older woman actively screaming for her very life and desperately leaning out of the passenger side window of a fast-moving vehicle. The specific suspect car in question was reportedly described as a dark gray or deeply dark blue Chevy Malibu speeding recklessly into the unknown night. Because this specific alarming detail currently comes from a single unverified external source, it must absolutely be treated with rigorous analytical caution. It has definitively not been formally authenticated by the primary federal agencies managing the case. They do not linger in the shadows with a medically fragile hostage. But if this unverified independent report is actually true, it dramatically, completely changes the physical trajectory of the escape. A dark suspect Chevy Malibu screaming wildly through the cold night with a terrified hostage fighting for her life perfectly neatly aligns with the established timeline of the total digital disconnection at exactly 2:28 in the morning. It clearly, vividly paints a gruesome, horrifying picture of the exact terrifying moment the ruthless perpetrators finally fled the quiet suburban neighborhood with their extremely fragile captive. The desperate detectives were now actively tracking a fast-moving ghost ship moving rapidly down the dark highway with a dying, helpless woman trapped inside. The entire investigation felt exactly like a runaway freight train heavily fueled by sheer adrenaline and the absolute terror of the rigid 24-hour medical deadline. Armed heavily with the terrifying leaked dispatch audio, the firmly cleared family timeline, and the reported unverified sighting of the dark gray suspect vehicle, the local authorities urgently prepared to radically shift their entire public media strategy. They desperately, urgently needed the public to instantly stop casually looking for a lost, wandering grandmother and start aggressively hunting for a highly dangerous moving vehicle. The local police department was just mere moments away from urgently calling a massive public press conference to formally announce this aggressive new direction. Unless they have a specific, terrifying reason to wait, they were fully, completely ready to deploy every single available municipal resource to hunt down that specific suspect car before her fragile biological clock completely ran out. But right exactly as they prepared to actively release this highly critical vital information to the desperate public, they were suddenly completely blindsided. The entire desperate investigation was strictly about to be violently derailed by a massive sudden injection of chaotic noise that would instantly throw the entire case into absolute, total, unmitigated chaos. Just as the regional task force prepared to blanket the national airwaves with the critical description of the fleeing sedan, a completely new, deeply insidious threat emerged from the digital shadows and deliberately paralyzed the command center. The physical investigation was suddenly and violently hijacked by a barrage of electronic extortion. The private inboxes of the grieving relatives were abruptly flooded with a series of highly sophisticated anonymous communications. These were not handwritten letters composed of magazine clippings dropped in a physical mail slot by a nervous amateur. They were heavily encrypted digital ransom demands meticulously routed through complex international proxy servers to perfectly mask their geographical origin. The perimeter security cameras were suddenly and deliberately severed from the network. We are looking at a timeline anomaly that completely shatters the typical profile of a suburban home invasion. The faceless senders demanded exorbitant financial payouts, and they specifically mandated that every single transaction be processed exclusively through completely untraceable Bitcoin transfers. The sudden chaotic influx of financial demands forced the federal agents into a grueling, agonizing psychological battle. The cyber division of the Bureau had to rapidly evaluate whether they were actually negotiating with the highly organized, ruthless syndicate, actively holding a fragile captive, or if they were simply wasting precious, dwindling hours chasing opportunistic internet scavengers. High-profile media tragedies inevitably attract a massive swarm of digital parasites who closely monitor the 24-hour news cycle and cruelly weaponize a terrified family's desperation for a quick, untraceable cryptocurrency payday. Every single incoming message had to be painstakingly analyzed for hidden linguistic patterns, complex technical metadata, and secret guarded proof-of-life indicators. Did any of these anonymous digital extortionists actually possess intimate, unreleased knowledge of the exact severe cardiovascular condition that was rapidly deteriorating with every passing hour? The excruciating reality was that verifying a cryptocurrency ransom demand is a notoriously slow and mathematically complex process. You cannot easily trace a decentralized digital wallet the way you can simply track a physical wire transfer or a traditional cellular phone ping. It forces us to ask what the perpetrator was doing during those 41 blind minutes. The specialized investigators were essentially forced to manually sift through a towering mountain of malicious digital noise while the biological clock of their primary target relentlessly ticked away. The sheer overwhelming volume of these cruel, opportunistic messages created a suffocating, dense fog over the entire local investigative operation. Desperate to immediately cut through the malicious interference and directly appeal to anyone who might actually possess actionable physical knowledge of the perpetrators' physical movements, the exhausted family made a dramatic and highly publicized tactical maneuver. They officially announced a staggering $1 million financial reward for any concrete, verifiable information leading directly to a safe return. Offering a massive 7-figure bounty is a huge calculated gamble in any ongoing missing persons inquiry. On one hand, a financial reward of that extraordinary, unprecedented magnitude is theoretically powerful enough to shatter the deepest criminal loyalties and strongly compel a nervous, low-level accomplice to quietly flip on their dangerous associates. It represents enough untraceable cash to start an entirely new, comfortable life far away from the dangerous reach of a violent syndicate. Welcome to Seth's Crime Vault, where we dissect the digital footprints left behind in the dark, but on the exact other hand, publicly attaching a massive confirmed monetary value to the dire situation inadvertently deeply validates the extreme high-profile nature of the target. It clearly signals to the hidden criminal underworld that they are indeed holding a tremendously valuable human asset. The desperate family was essentially attempting to outbid the kidnappers, utilizing their vast financial resources to directly purchase a miracle before the strict physical window slammed shut permanently. This monumental financial declaration instantly turned the quiet suburban tragedy into a frenzied, loud national spectacle. The local emergency tip lines were immediately completely overwhelmed by a staggering tidal wave of unverified random sightings, wild internet conspiracy theories, and deliberate, cruel, malicious hoaxes. The already stretched entirely thin detectives suddenly found themselves desperately drowning in a sea of useless, panicked information generated by amateur online sleuths hoping to instantly claim the historic massive bounty. The entire fragile investigative apparatus was dangerously close to total systemic collapse under. If you want to uncover the forensic truth behind the cases that the mainstream media only glosses over, make sure you subscribe and stay with me. The crushing heavy weight of the fake ransom emails and the chaotic, unmanageable public response. The crucial focus had disastrously shifted entirely away from the silent, empty physical house and the invisible electronic data trails that actually held the real hidden answers, but deep within the heavily corrupted proprietary servers of the recently blinded smart security network, a lone dedicated forensic technician was quietly piecing together a tiny fragmented encrypted file that was about to completely silence the entire chaotic media circus, the confusing digital ransom notes, and the massive public financial reward were ultimately just blinding, distracting smokescreens, obscuring a much more terrifying, deeply localized truth. If you want to understand exactly how a single partially recovered photograph completely rewrote the complex timeline of this entire sinister operation, drop your best theories in the comments section below and let us dive straight into the absolute most chilling digital revelation of this entire dark case. While the national media frantically debated the absolute legitimacy of the various digital extortion attempts, the Cybercrimes Unit achieved a monumental, unexpected breakthrough. They managed to successfully extract a single, highly compressed visual file from the remote cloud architecture that managed the property's exterior cameras. The deeply haunting image clearly, vividly depicted a solitary, unknown male figure ominously standing directly at the primary entrance of the residence. We need to look closely at the life of the woman who was taken because her daily routine explains exactly how a modern fortress could be breached. The shadowy individual's face was entirely obscured by a heavy, dark mask deliberately designed to easily defeat any basic standard facial recognition software. The chilling, confident posture of the masked man radiated a calm, calculated menace, completely unlike a desperate amateur neighborhood burglar scoping out a quick, easy target. But the absolute most explosive, terrifying element of this recovered digital artifact was definitively not the terrifying subject captured within the static frame. It was the deeply controversial, invisible metadata permanently embedded deep inside the digital file itself. A massive, unprecedented conflict immediately erupted between the local law enforcement agencies and the colossal technology corporation officially responsible for hosting the private cloud storage. The local detectives forcefully, aggressively argued that the chilling photograph was definitively captured in the dead of night. On January 31st, representing the exact horrifying moment the unknown perpetrator actively initiated the violent breach. However, the massive technology company analyzed their own proprietary server logs and presented a completely different, deeply disturbing internal timeline. The corporate network engineers strongly insisted that the internal digital timestamp securely attached to the image definitively placed the exact moment of capture strictly on January 11th. This intense technical disagreement over a seemingly simple digital calendar date is definitively 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie lived a life completely enveloped by an invisible web of modern technology. Not just a minor clerical error or a trivial bureaucratic dispute over remote server synchronization. It is the absolute most critical, vital turning point in the entirety of the massive investigation. If the corporate engineers are mathematically, factually correct, and the photograph was actually taken a full 20 days before the actual physical abduction occurred, it completely violently shatters every single remaining assumption about the core nature of the crime. It definitively proves beyond any shadow of a reasonable doubt that the masked individual was absolutely not just a random violent predator who simply got exceptionally lucky on a quiet winter evening. It clearly reveals a highly sophisticated, meticulously planned physical surveillance operation that patiently spanned nearly 3 entire weeks. This terrifying revelation of extended long-term physical reconnaissance perfectly comprehensively explains the massive glaring anomaly that has haunted the lead detectives from the very beginning. It finally successfully provides a deeply logical, terrifying answer to the agonizing central mystery of the 41-minute digital silence inside the house. If a criminal organization spent 20 full days carefully monitoring the property, remotely tracking the exact times the heavy mechanical, she was not just a senior citizen enjoying a quiet suburban retirement. Doors opened, and mapping the precise blind spots of the digital perimeter, they would know exactly how the interior of the fortress operated. They would fully, intimately understand the complex physiological routines, the specific